Hi, everyone. I'm Elly.
And I'm Amy.
We want to welcome you guys today to the Product School's webinar on product managers and the art of storytelling. So Amy and I have actually been friends since high school, and we've both been in product management the majority of our careers. I'm a senior product manager at Amazon, and Amy's a senior product manager at United. We're really excited to share with you guys a little bit more about our experiences today. So I have about 10 years of experience in the digital space, and most of that has been in ad tech, primarily focused on internal tools, external tools, some API integrations, social and content platforms, and attribution solutions. For the last couple of years, I've been working on video solutions for Amazon's retail space, and now I'm working on internal tools for Amazon associates. Amy?
Thanks, Elly, and hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. To share a little bit about me, I'm also a senior product manager with just about 10 years of experience. I've been lucky to spend my career at two great companies. I started out at Discover Card, focused on the mobile app, and during my time there, I branched out to a few other product roles supporting various parts of the business. And then about 3 years ago, I decided to switch industries and I moved to United Airlines, where I currently work as a product manager responsible for the digital account experience. So now that you know a little bit about us, let's talk about storytelling and what we're going to be covering today. Our material can be broken down into three main sections. We're going to start by talking about the value of storytelling and why it's an important skill for product managers. Then we're going to talk about how to develop the content for a good story. And the last piece we'll cover is how to take that story and effectively share it with others. Our hope is that you leave today's discussion with some new techniques and a better understanding of how you can use storytelling to be a more effective product manager. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Elly to jump right in.
All right. So we'll get started today by talking about why storytelling is so important as a product manager. So I don't think it's an over-exaggeration to say that storytelling is critical at every point in the product lifecycle. It's a PM's job to advocate for their customer and to ensure that the rest of the organization understands why you're focusing on this problem versus the hundreds of other problems that are plaguing your customers. Properly defining this narrative around the problem and the solution, as well as the go-to-market strategy, these are going to be a few key ways that your story is going to be crucial in your success as a product manager. Constructing a compelling story from the problem statement through to launch and then iteration will also allow you to, one, better advocate for your customer. Two, it'll help you earn trust with leadership and your stakeholders. And three, it'll accelerate your adoption from the end users. Stories are powerful tools because they engage your audience. Humans make decisions based on emotions. As much as we all want to think that we're rational people that are driven only by logic and data, emotions drive much of the decisions that we make. And while data is going to be key in telling your story, the art of constructing the narrative will be just as important. Stories also streamline information. As a PM, you're going to spend a ton of time researching your customers' problems and determining what is most important to solve, as well as how to solve them. While it's incredibly important that you do a really good job at this, it's also equally important that you distill this information down into an easy to understand package for your audience. Depending on who you're telling your story to, chances are they don't need to understand the sausage making. They just want to understand why the option that you've chosen is the best solution for your customers. Finally, stories can be repurposed. This may all seem like a lot of work, what we're about to go through here, but the best storytellers can create a narrative and use it for many different purposes. Done correctly, these approaches are actually going to save you time and ensure that there's consistent messaging across your stakeholders and for your solution. Now we're going to jump into just one approach that I have for developing content that we found to be successful. So if there was ever a quote to describe product management, it's this one from Einstein. If I had an hour to spend to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solution. As a PM, and frankly, as a human, it's human nature to want to go straight to the solution. The end goal, after all, is to deliver solutions that are going to benefit our customers. Rushing to the solution, though, is one of the main pitfalls that new product managers fall into. PMs should really spend the majority of their time thinking about the problems. And in turn, it's going to allow you to create better, more innovative solutions for your end users. As I mentioned, I'm going to go through one approach for developing content. After that, Amy's going to dive into some strategies for packaging and delivering that content. While we found these approaches to be very successful in our work, we recommend that you take whatever pieces you can that you think will improve your processes and apply them to your work. All right. So starting with the customer and working backwards is probably the biggest tip I can give any PM for framing up a problem and subsequent solutions. It may seem pretty obvious, but it's vital that you always come back to that principle for each problem that you're working on. Your first question should always be, who is the customer that you are trying to solve for? Here's where you're going to consider not only just who the obvious person you're trying to solve for is, but what different cohorts might be contained within the original perception of your customer? How are their needs going to vary or change over time? For example, an Amazon customer is different than an Amazon Prime customer, who then is different from an Amazon Prime customer who interacts with Prime Video content. Really honing in on who the customer is will help ensure that you have a focused problem statement. Next, you'll want to define the problem and the opportunity. I like to frame it up by framing both the problem and the opportunity so that it has a positive light to what you're looking to express to leadership and your audiences. As I mentioned, it might be very tempting to go straight to the solution, but I've got to say that that approach shortchanges your end user. I've had many situations in my career where end users have come to me and said, I need this solved. I need this feature. But when asking more probing questions, we've been able to come up with a better solution that maybe they hadn't considered. This brings me to yet another quote, this one by Henry Ford. If I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. It's your job to figure out what the real opportunity is. Here you should delve into areas for improvement that you've identified. I tend to frame it in this way. I say, here is the issue as it exists today, and here is the opportunity and how you're going to have a positive impact on your customers by solving this issue. This should be really a well thought out response supported with data, and here is where you're going to advocate for the issues that your customers are dealing with. And here's where you're going to want to sell why it's important to solve for them. After really considering these questions, you'll be better able to jump into solutioning. So fast forward, assume that you've settled on a solution, whether that be on your own or with your team. You're going to want to support why the solution makes sense. So here's where you answer, what is the most important customer benefit? This question will touch on the emotional aspect of storytelling that I mentioned earlier. After reviewing this answer, your audience should understand why the solution is really exciting and why it's something that your customers are going to love. If you can't articulate this at this point, you probably need to go back and spend more time on the customer problem. Make sure that your solution is the best fit for solving it. Next, you need to consider priority. This leads to the question, why is it important for you to solve this problem right now? As a PM, you're always working on competing priorities, and leadership is thinking about even more than that. So clearly defining not only why this is important, but why it's needed right now is going to help rationalize the investment. Finally, you'll want to support your assertions with data. And answer, how do you know your customer needs or wants this? While data should be included in all the previous questions that I posed, it's most important here. In this question, you need to succinctly lay out how you've come to decide that this solution is going to be used by your customers. A great answer here will include both quantitative and qualitative feedback. All right, I'm going to briefly go through an example here. It's very high level, pretty short responses, but I think it's important for framing more of being able to show you how to use this framework in practice. So feel free to run through this with some of the products or problems that you're working on today. So for my example, I'm going to pretend that I am a streaming service PM, and I'm going to be looking to solve for an issue that has bugged me for many years until luckily it was solved a couple years ago. And that is the fact that customers or viewers had to sit through the intros to shows. So either you needed to fast forward or watch the intro to shows when you're sitting and binging content. So assuming I'm the PM here, I might want to dive into this to improve the experience. And I'm gonna just pop through some of these and talk you through them. So first is, who is the customer? So here I might say, the customer we're looking to solve for is an active streaming user who watches multiple episodes of the same show in a single sitting. They want to passively ingest content with minimal to no distractions from the service or interaction from their end. So note, while the feature I decide on might actually benefit all users or all viewers, I'm specifically focused on solving for those that are binging. And that's given me a very specific customer that I can build a problem statement around. So next I move on to the problem or opportunity. Here I might say, streaming service viewers are not interested in watching the opening credits of shows, especially when they are watching multiple episodes of a single show in one sitting. We have the opportunity to decrease user frustrations and increase the hours of TV viewed by resolving this issue. So here, hopefully I'm getting leadership excited about the value that we're going to drive with the opportunity, as opposed to just honing in on the problem. Next, what's the most important customer benefit? The most important customer benefit is improved usability of our service. We want to make it as easy as possible for viewers to engage with our streaming service. In allowing viewers to skip the intro and start the show immediately, we remove the user intervention of needing to fast forward to the correct spot. Sorry guys, moved a little too forward there. So next, why is it important now? With more and more companies releasing streaming services, it's important that we solve for the areas we know impede viewer engagement. During user studies, we found that this is ranked number X in terms of largest user frustrations. To solidify ourselves as the top streaming service for our viewers, we need to prioritize usability along with content. So again, here I'm thinking, what are the other priorities? Why should this be ranked above? Why is it so important? And you can see that it's supported with a little bit of data there. And finally, you're going to want to answer, how do you know your customer needs or wants this? Here I might say, we find that X% of viewers fast forward through credits. This number increased to Y% when a viewer watches more than one episode of a show in one sitting. We've also found that this is ranked X or Z in complaints in customer surveys. So here's where data becomes king. And if I had some qualitative data to add here, it might be helpful as well. So using this approach when you're breaking down a problem is going to make it much easier for you to package and deliver your story. I'm going to pass it over to Amy right now to jump into how to do that successfully.
Awesome. Thanks, Elly. So now that you've done your research and analysis to clearly define the who, the what, and the why in terms of the problem you're trying to solve for, now it's time to start thinking about how you can package all this content so that it's ready to share with others. If you've done the work to have a solid understanding of the opportunity you're solving for and understanding why it's important, then the delivery of the story is going to be much easier. So let's talk about how you can prepare for evangelizing your story. Now, before you dive right into making a PowerPoint or really in-depth presentation, start by taking a moment to make sure that you can clearly articulate the basics of your storyline with little supporting materials. Here are some practical tips to make sure that you know your story. First, you can start by writing a rough outline in just plain words. When Elly and I were actually starting to work on this webinar together, we started with just a basic Word doc that you see on the screen here, and just made notes as we made our story outline and talked about our narrative over the phone. And we started this way because we wanted to make sure that we really aligned on the central message we wanted to communicate and got the foundation set for this storytelling experience. Another easy way to outline your story is just using sticky notes. So you can create an outline putting major points or different sections on each sticky note, and then easily move them around to have your story make more sense. At this stage, it's most important to focus on getting the content and the message right versus spending a lot of time and energy on making the perfect slides or polished visuals. Another great tip is just to sit down with a coworker outside of your working team and share your story. Although they might not have all the background on your customer group or your product space, they should still be able to grasp the what and the who and the why, and let them ask you questions. This could really help highlight areas that you either haven't considered or areas where you need to adjust your storyline to make more sense. I always like to tell my team to use what I call the Linda test. Linda is our Chief Technology Officer. And if you were to run into her virtually now, and she asks what you were working on, would you be able to articulate the what and the why in just a couple of sentences? So if you find yourself struggling to articulate your story in a more informal setting like that, without reading off of slides or having notes in front of you, that's probably an indication that you need to do a little bit more homework and spend some more time really knowing your story. Remember, you are an advocate for your customers and what they need. So if you're struggling to tell others your story clearly and enthusiastically, it's going to be a really tough sell to get others on board. Now, I want to take a brief moment to circle back to a point that Elly mentioned earlier. Depending on what point you are in the product lifecycle, you may have a really thorough understanding of the customer problem you're trying to solve, but you might not have the solution yet. And that's totally okay. You still might find yourself in situations where you need to share your story before that solutioning phase has taken place. And it's important for those conversations to go well. Try to resist the urge to start pitching solutions too early, and instead focus more on framing the problem and talking about what a successful solution would achieve and how the team will move into the solutioning phase. Again, it's only human nature that we want to fix everything and have solutions for every problem right away. But as PMs, our job is not necessarily to come up with all the answers and solutions to everything. Our job is to make sure that we can identify and articulate the right customer problems to solve, and then mobilize our teams to help drive the overall solutions. So once you feel like you've got your story down, you should identify the key players that need to hear your story. Now, based on your organization, there may be a standard process or forum for PMs to socialize their customer problems or opportunity statements. But for others, the path forward may not be as clear, and that's okay. If that's the case, you can ask yourself or your manager these basic questions. First, who do I need to get buy-in or approval from in order to move this idea forward? Another good question to ask is, who is going to be part of the core working team to help drive the solution and execution? How can I set them up for success? The answers to these questions will help you understand who needs to be in the audience when you share your story. When preparing for these conversations, do your homework and know your audience. This will help you figure out which parts of your story may need more or less emphasis. Knowing your audience can help you anticipate their questions and proactively address them up front. Some good questions to ask about your audience include things like, what do they already know about what I'm going to tell them? How does my story align with their goals or objectives? What concerns might they have? There's nothing worse than being in a meeting or when you're presenting and you can tell that someone in the audience is completely unengaged, their mind is somewhere else, or worse yet, they're getting frustrated by what you're saying, or you can tell that they really disagree with what you're saying. And so doing your homework and tailoring your pitch based on who's in the audience can really help avoid those not so fun situations. All organizations and teams are different, but based on my personal experience, if you're presenting to higher level leadership, they tend to think more big picture and want to understand how your product aligns with the overall company goals or objectives. And they may not need to understand every single detail of your product or experience. On the other hand, if your audience consists more of your core working team, so engineers, testers, UXers, they'll probably need a little bit more detail to understand what they're solutioning for and what it needs to achieve. And you can probably skip more of the background information since they're already very familiar with your product. Another group to consider is external stakeholders. So external to your working team, another department, maybe outside of your company. They typically need a little bit more background to get grounded in your product strategy, what is current state, and they may have very different goals from you. So for this group, it's very important to make sure you try to relate your goals to theirs in some way. Next, you can think about what supporting materials will help you deliver your story. Again, this may depend on your organization, but here are some common materials that PMs use to help tell a story. Something like a product memo is usually less visual, has a lot of details in it, and that's meant to be sent as a pre-read before a meeting, and then it's kind of referenced as you meet with a group. Slides, like we're using today, can be helpful, but with slides, you always want to remember that less is more. Avoid complicated data visualizations and long paragraphs of text because it's really hard for people to listen and read at the same time. You can also consider mediums like prototypes, demos, videos, and those may be appropriate depending on the setting and how they're going to be used. But whatever medium you choose, it's important to not lose track of the basics at this step. So remember some of the key sections that Elly outlined earlier and make sure that those guide your pitch. So thinking about starting with the customer and working backwards. Who are you trying to solve for? What is the problem? What is the opportunity? And then that ladders up to more of the solutioning. These are the key questions you want to make sure that you answer as you're telling your story. So now you have your story, you know your audience, and you've prepped any supporting materials. That means it's story time. If you get nervous presenting, just remind yourself that you are the expert in the room and you've just spent a great deal of time analyzing, researching your customer and your story, and you have all the supporting data you need to tell that story effectively. It's okay if there's people in the room who have questions or may not agree. You've done the homework to either defend your stance or form an opinion on other ideas that may get brought up. It's also okay if you don't know the answer to every question. During your research and analysis, you have probably identified other subject matter experts who will be working side by side with you, and you should feel comfortable calling on those folks to add their expertise or let the audience know that you'll bring the questions back to the team. Most importantly, just be confident and let your passion and excitement come through. People are usually more likely to listen to someone who really believes in what they're talking about. So we've walked through a lot of different techniques and tips to help tell great stories, but we'd love to hear from you. So what has worked for you in the past? What great storytelling experiences have you been a part of, either as the storyteller or maybe someone in the audience? Let us know what stood out for you. I'm sure there's a lot of other great techniques that we haven't had time to cover today. So feel free to share your ideas in the comments below. Also, at this point in the webinar, you may be feeling like what we covered is overwhelming or will take too much time. And you may be wondering, is it all worth it? Yes, it's worth it. The truth is that it is a lot of work, but it becomes second nature when you train your mind to focus on the problem first. And it's also worth noting that based on our experience, spending the necessary time up front, framing your problem and the story can make the design and the delivery of the solution move much more efficiently. And finally, don't feel like you need to follow every single step that we've covered here today. This was meant to arm you with various tools that you can keep in your toolbox and apply them where it makes sense. So as we wrap up our story today, we'd like to leave you with a few takeaways. So I'm going to kick it back over to Elly.
Thanks, Amy. I'm about to read straight off of slides, which I'm sure is not recommended in delivery, but hopefully helpful when it comes to key takeaways. So number one, remember that storytelling is critical at every point in the product life cycle. Number two, while it might be tempting to solution right away, you always need to start with your customer and the problem and work backwards. Number three, it's okay to tell a story that you don't know the ending to just yet. That's part of developing the problem statement. Number four, different people need different parts of the story to be told to them. Be sure to tailor your message to the audience. And finally, number five, this may all seem like a lot of work, but it's worth it in the end.
So thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. We really hope that you found this helpful, and good luck telling your stories.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.